In the vibrant heart of the sleepy yet bustling village of Enzi, nestled between endless stretches of golden savanna and the majestic acacia trees, life moved at a comfortable, familiar pace. Enzi School stood proudly at the village's center, where students gathered every morning with laughter, lessons, and dreams of bright futures. For years, the students at Enzi had been raised on tales of discipline, hard work, and resilience. But change was about to sweep through Enzi in the form of a stranger, a man with a gift of sweetness and a charm that concealed a dark secret. One sweltering afternoon, as school let out, the students noticed a new sight by the school gate. A quaint, colorful stall adorned with ribbons and whimsical designs had seemingly appeared out of nowhere. Behind it stood a tall, slender man in a long, elegantly tailored coat and a wide-brimmed hat that shaded his sharp, intense eyes. His name was Mr. Kendi, a chocolatier with a reputation as sweet as the treats he offered. His voice was like honey, and when he spoke, students found themselves drawn in, hanging on to every word. "Step right up, children of Enzi," he called out, extending a tray of chocolates so rich and dark they glistened under the sun. The students, curious and captivated, crowded around Mr. Kendi. He handed out samples, each piece wrapped in delicate, shimmering paper that made the chocolates seem like treasures from a far-off, magical land. Nia, a bright-eyed student with an insatiable curiosity, took a piece and let it melt on her tongue. The taste was unlike anything she'd ever known, smooth, intense, and infused with an exotic blend of flavors that left her wanting more. "This chocolate is amazing, Mr. Kendi," Nia exclaimed, her face lighting up as she savored every bit. "Thank you, my dear," Mr. Kendi replied, bowing graciously. "It is my gift to the students of Enzi. You are the future of this village, and I want you to taste something unforgettable." As the other students eagerly accepted their pieces, Nia glanced around and noticed something strange. Every student who tasted the chocolate wore the same blissful, almost entranced expression. It was as if the treat had cast a spell on them, pulling them into a world where everything else faded away. Soon more and more students gathered around, each wanting their own taste of the delightful treat. At first, it seemed harmless. The teachers were glad to see the children so happy, and the villagers noticed how cheerful the school days had become. But as the days turned into weeks, something about Mr. Kendi's chocolates began to stir quiet whispers among the adults. Students who had once been focused and diligent now seemed distracted, spending their free time huddled near Mr. Kendi's stall, begging for more samples, or spending every coin they had to buy another piece. The lure of the chocolate had taken root, and the students' enthusiasm was quickly becoming something else, something more obsessive. Mr. Bakery, the school's wise headmaster, was the first to sense that something was wrong. A man of quiet strength and deep insight, Mr. Bakery had seen his share of tricksters and smooth talkers come through the village over the years. He watched as his students, once disciplined and eager to learn, began to slack off, their eyes losing the spark of curiosity that he'd always cherished. More troublingly, he noticed that the chocolates weren't just a treat. They had become an addiction, a craving that seemed to hold his students captive. One evening, as he locked up the school, Mr. Bakery noticed a shadow lingering by the gates. Stepping closer, he found Nia, her eyes wide and pleading, clutching a small coin in her hand. "Please, sir," she whispered, "just one more piece. I need it for my studies." Mr. Bakery knelt down, his heart heavy with worry. "Nia, what's happened to you? You were once one of my brightest students, and now you're not yourself. What is this chocolate doing to you?" But Nia only shook her head, avoiding his gaze. "It's just chocolate, sir," she said, though her voice betrayed a hint of desperation. "It makes me feel happy. Please, I just need a little more." As Nia hurried off into the fading light, Mr. Bakery's heart clenched. Something dark was at play, something he couldn't yet understand. And he knew, with a sense of foreboding, that Mr. Kendi and his chocolates were not what they seemed. As days turned to weeks, the lure of Mr. Kendi's chocolates became an undeniable presence at Enzi School. Each day, students would arrive early, hoping to get their hands on the delectable treats before classes began. The air around the school was often filled with the rich, intoxicating aroma of cocoa and spices, an enticing scent that seemed to wrap itself around the students like a warm, inviting embrace. Even those who resisted at first found themselves inching closer to the stall, their curiosity finally giving in to the allure. Nia, who had been among the first to taste the chocolates, became something of a regular at Mr. Kendi's stall. She found herself daydreaming about the rich, smooth taste during class, and even her friends noticed how she seemed distracted. Her close friend Mwamba couldn't help but worry. He remembered Nia as the girl who was always eager to answer questions in class and excel in her studies. But now, she seemed distant, her mind often wandering to thoughts of chocolate. "Nia, what's going on with you?" Mwamba asked one afternoon, as they sat together under the shade of a baobab tree during their lunch break. "You're not the same. It's like the chocolate is all you think about." Nia shrugged, but her gaze was distant. "It's just so good, Mwamba. You wouldn't understand unless you tasted it yourself. It makes everything feel lighter, like nothing else matters." Mwamba frowned. He had tried the chocolates once, but he hadn't been drawn to them like his classmates. He had sensed something strange about the way Mr. Kendi's chocolates made people feel. It wasn't just happiness. It was something deeper, almost like a need. Meanwhile, Mr. Kendi's stall was busier than ever. The chocolatier's face lit up each time a student approached, and he handed out his treats with a gleeful grin that seemed to mask something darker. As the weeks passed, he began charging for the chocolates, a small price at first, but one that steadily increased. Many students started using their pocket money, or small allowances, just to buy a single piece. The teachers noticed the change too, especially Mr. Bakery. He observed how students would linger near the school gates, waiting for Mr. Kendi, sometimes arriving as early as dawn. It wasn't just excitement anymore. It was desperation. And with each passing day, Mr. Kendi's influence over the students grew stronger. But the turning point came when the school's top student, Amani, began missing classes altogether. Known for her discipline and dedication, Amani had never once skipped school. But now, she spent her mornings at Mr. Kendi's stall, a shadow of the bright girl she once was. When confronted by her teacher, Amani simply shrugged, her face pale and drawn. "It's just chocolate," she murmured, though her eyes held a look of longing and dependency that Mr. Bakery couldn't ignore. With concern growing, Mr. Bakery decided it was time to investigate further. The student's behavior was alarming, and he couldn't shake the feeling that Mr. Kendi was more than he appeared. Determined to get to the bottom of the mystery, Mr. Bakery resolved to confront the chocolatier and uncover the truth. But as he approached Mr. Kendi's stall, the chocolatier met his gaze with a knowing smile, as if he had anticipated this confrontation all along. And in that moment, Mr. Bakery felt a chill run down his spine, a foreboding sense that this was only the beginning of a far darker journey. As the days passed, Mr. Bakery's concern deepened. He noticed more and more students falling under the spell of Mr. Kendi's chocolates, their once bright eyes dulled by an unexplainable craving. Desperation had crept into the school, and it wasn't long before students began taking drastic measures just to buy more of the mysterious treats. Some even resorted to selling their personal belongings, anything they could spare, to afford just one more piece of chocolate. The headmaster decided to keep a closer eye on Mr. Kendi's stall. Early one morning, before dawn had broken, he arrived at the school and waited. When Mr. Kendi finally appeared, he was carrying an odd-looking sack over his shoulder. The headmaster watched as the chocolatier carefully set up his stall, pouring a strange powder into the mixture he used to make the chocolates. Mr. Bakery's suspicions flared, but he needed proof. Later that day, Mwamba, who had continued to watch Nia grow more dependent on the chocolate, decided he had to find out what was happening. He was determined to protect his friend, and he sensed that something wasn't right. He had heard the rumors among the students, whispers that Mr. Kendi's chocolates were magic, capable of making anyone feel amazing. But Mwamba didn't believe in magic. There had to be another explanation. That afternoon, as Mr. Kendi closed up his stall, Mwamba lingered nearby, pretending to tie his shoe. He watched as Mr. Kendi packed up his things and noticed, just for a moment, a small vial of powder fall from the chocolatier's pocket. It was a strange, shimmering substance that caught the light in an unnatural way. Before Mr. Kendi could notice, Mwamba quickly scooped up the vial, and slipped it into his pocket. His heart pounded with fear and excitement, but he knew he had to act fast. If this powder was somehow connected to the chocolates, he would need to show it to someone who could help. As Mwamba hurried home, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was onto something much bigger than he had realized. His curiosity was tempered by fear, but he was determined to protect his friends. And with the mysterious powder in his possession, he was one step closer to discovering the truth behind Mr. Kendi's addictive chocolates. With the small vial tucked safely in his pocket, Mwamba hurried home, his mind racing. The mysterious powder felt warm, almost alive, as he clutched it tightly, wondering what secrets it held. The thought of revealing Mr. Kendi's true intentions excited and terrified him. But he knew he couldn't do it alone. He needed someone wise and trustworthy. Someone who would believe him despite how incredible the story sounded. That night, Mwamba waited until his parents had gone to bed before he slipped out of the house. He made his way down the winding dirt path toward the hut of Ms. Kasai, an elderly healer who lived on the outskirts of the village. Ms. Kasai was known for her wisdom and knowledge of herbs and potions. She had been a friend to many families in the village, treating illnesses and injuries with remedies she concocted from plants and minerals. When Mwamba arrived, Ms. Kasai was still awake, her small hut lit by a dim lantern. She looked up, her eyes narrowing as she noticed the boy's troubled expression. "Mwamba, my child, what brings you here at this hour?" she asked in her gentle, raspy voice. Mwamba hesitated, then held out the vial. "I found this, it fell from Mr. Kendi's pocket. I think he's putting it in the chocolates he gives to the students. They're acting strange." Ms. Kasai took the vial, examining it carefully under the lantern's light. Her face grew grim as she opened it and sniffed, a hint of recognition flashing in her eyes. She placed a small pinch of the powder on her tongue and immediately spat it out, her face a mask of horror. "This is dangerous, Mwamba," she whispered, her voice shaking. "This powder isn't just a flavor or a spice. It's an addictive herb from the northern lands. It makes people feel euphoric, but it also chains them, binds them to the one who controls it. It's how some powerful men keep their followers loyal. But to give it to children," she trailed off, shaking her head in disbelief. Mwamba felt a chill creep down his spine. "So it's true then. Mr. Kendi is using this powder to control us." Ms. Kasai nodded slowly. "He must be stopped. If this continues, your friends will become slaves to their cravings, unable to think or act without his chocolates." Mwamba clenched his fists. He felt a mix of anger and determination. "Then we have to expose him, show everyone what he's doing." But Ms. Kasai placed a hand on his shoulder, her gaze intense. "Be careful, Mwamba. Men like Mr. Kendi are clever and dangerous. You will need proof and a plan. Only then can you make others believe you." Mwamba nodded, a fire ignited within him. He knew the road ahead would be challenging, but he was ready to face it. He would gather evidence, he would find allies, and he would make sure the truth came to light. Armed with Ms. Kasai's warning, and the knowledge of Mr. Kendi's addictive powder, Mwamba spent the next few days planning. He would need proof, something undeniable, that would force Mr. Kendi to reveal his true intentions. Mwamba's mind raced with possibilities. Should he confront Mr. Kendi? Should he go to the headmaster? Or should he try to tell his friends? He decided to start with his closest friends, Nia and Zuri. Nia, still deeply affected by her craving for the chocolates, had become withdrawn and irritable, her once bright personality overshadowed by a desperation that Mwamba barely recognized. Zuri, however, had always been a skeptic. She hadn't been as drawn to the chocolates, and had resisted the lure Mr. Kendi's stall held over the other students. Mwamba met them both after school by their favorite spot under the old baobab tree, his heart pounding with nerves. Taking a deep breath, he told them everything about the powder, the addictive properties, and how Mr. Kendi was using it to control the students. Zuri's eyes widened in shock, while Nia stared at him with a skeptical look. "You're serious, Mwamba? Do you know how crazy this sounds?" she whispered, glancing around to make sure no one else could hear them. "Yes, I know it sounds crazy," Mwamba insisted, his voice trembling. "But it's true. Ms. Kasai tested the powder herself. She said it's something dangerous, something that binds people." Zuri looked thoughtful. "Then we need to find a way to prove it. If Mr. Kendi is really doing this, then we can't just sit by and let him keep hurting everyone. Nia bit her lip, her hands trembling slightly. But it's just chocolate, Mwamba. It makes us feel good. What's so bad about that? Mwamba sighed, his heart aching for his friend. Nia, that's exactly what he wants you to think. He's making you depend on him, so you'll keep coming back. Don't you see? Nia shook her head, looking torn. I don't know, Mwamba. It just sounds so hard to believe. Seeing her uncertainty, Mwamba took her hand gently. Please, Nia. Trust me. Just try to stop eating the chocolates and see how you feel. You'll understand, I promise. Zuri nodded, her face set with determination. We'll find a way to prove this, Mwamba. And when we do, we'll expose Mr. Kendi and make sure he never does this to anyone else. Mwamba felt a surge of relief, grateful for Zuri's support. Though Nia's hesitation worried him, he knew he had taken the first step. With his friends by his side, they would gather the evidence needed to bring Mr. Kendi's secrets into the light. But none of them knew just how dangerous the path ahead would be, or the dark forces that would stand in their way. And the school's atmosphere grew increasingly strange. Students who had once excelled academically began to slip in their studies, their thoughts consumed by a single desire: Mr. Kendi's chocolates. A sense of eerie quiet hung over Enzi School, as if a shadow had blanketed the lively campus, turning the students into shells of their former selves. Mr. Bakery, growing more alarmed with each passing day, decided to act. He gathered the teachers in his office and shared his suspicions about Mr. Kendi. The other teachers were skeptical. After all, it was hard to believe that mere chocolates could cause such a transformation. But Mr. Bakery was insistent. If this goes on, we may lose our students, he warned them. Mr. Kendi is no ordinary chocolatier. But Mr. Bakery's warning wasn't enough. The teachers remained uncertain, reluctant to act without proof. And so, Mr. Bakery turned to his last hope, Mwamba. One evening, he called Mwamba to his office, sensing that the young boy might have answers. Mwamba, you've always been observant, Mr. Bakery said. Tell me, do you know what's happening to your classmates? Mwamba hesitated, unsure if he could trust the headmaster with the truth. But he saw the concern in Mr. Bakery's eyes, and decided to share his findings, including Ms. Keisai's analysis of the powder. Mr. Bakery listened in stunned silence, his face darkening. This is worse than I imagined, he murmured. We need to find more evidence. If Mr. Kendi is truly using such a substance, we cannot let him continue. Together they devised a plan. Mwamba would gather more proof of Mr. Kendi's actions, and with Mr. Bakery's help, they would expose him once and for all. But as they spoke, neither realized that a pair of eyes watched them from the shadows. A figure who quickly slipped away, disappearing into the night. The next morning, word spread like wildfire. Somehow, Mr. Kendi had found out about Mwamba's investigation. By noon, he summoned Mwamba to his stall, his usual charm replaced with an icy stare. Mwamba, he began, his voice deceptively gentle. I hear you've been spreading rumors about my chocolates. That's a dangerous game for a young boy to play. Mwamba felt a shiver of fear, but stood his ground. I know what you're doing, Mr. Kendi. You're using something to make us crave the chocolates. Mr. Kendi chuckled, a dark, mocking sound. Ah, you think you figured it all out, don't you? You're clever, Mwamba, but you're playing with fire. I would hate for you to get burned. With that, Mr. Kendi dismissed him, but Mwamba felt an unmistakable warning. From that moment on, he was always looking over his shoulder, sensing that he was being watched. Still, his resolve was unshaken. He knew he had to stop Mr. Kendi, no matter the cost. Mwamba knew he needed more allies. His friends Nia and Zuri stood by him, but he needed someone with influence. Reluctantly, he approached Ms. Keisai again, hoping her knowledge and experience could aid his cause. Ms. Keisai, though wary of Mr. Kendi's influence, agreed to help. She warned Mwamba that the chocolatier's power extended beyond the village. He's well connected, she told him. If you try to expose him, he won't hesitate to silence you. Despite her warning, she gave Mwamba a new plan. They would need to find a sample of Mr. Kendi's chocolate with the powder intact and test it in front of the village elders. If they see it with their own eyes, Ms. Keisai said, they'll believe. But the plan was risky. Mr. Kendi had become more vigilant, watching every student who approached his stall. Mwamba would need to be clever if he was to secure a sample without getting caught. Mwamba and his friends spent days planning. Zuri suggested that they distract Mr. Kendi, giving Mwamba a chance to swipe a piece of chocolate. They waited until the end of the school day, when the crowd around the stall was thinning. Nia approached the stall first, pretending to buy a piece while Zuri accidentally tripped, causing a commotion. As Mr. Kendi was distracted, Mwamba slipped behind the stall, grabbing a wrapped piece of chocolate and stashing it in his pocket before quickly retreating. His heart pounded as he hurried back to Ms. Keisai's hut, where she waited to test it. But as they unwrapped the chocolate, they realized they weren't alone. Mr. Kendi had followed them, his gaze cold and calculating. "You're more foolish than I thought," he sneered. "Did you really think I'd let you ruin my plans?" Before Mwamba could react, Mr. Kendi lunged forward, snatching the chocolate from his hands. Ms. Keisai tried to intervene, but Mr. Kendi shoved her aside, his face twisted with anger. "This ends now," he spat, glaring at Mwamba. "You've meddled enough." With that, he disappeared into the night, leaving Mwamba shaken but more determined than ever. He knew he had to act fast. Mr. Kendi wouldn't give him another chance. Realizing they were running out of time, Mwamba, Nia, and Zuri devised a bold plan. They would confront Mr. Kendi in front of the entire village, revealing his secret once and for all. They couldn't rely on stealth or subtlety anymore. Only a public confrontation would work now. The next day, Mwamba gathered the students and teachers outside the school, waiting for Mr. Kendi to arrive. He stepped forward, his voice clear and steady. "Mr. Kendi has been deceiving us," he announced, holding up the vial of powder. "This is what he's been putting in his chocolates. It's not just a treat. It's something that makes us addicted, that controls us." A murmur of shock rippled through the crowd as the villagers watched, some whispering in disbelief. Mr. Kendi approached, his face an unreadable mask, but Mwamba noticed a flicker of fear in his eyes. "You have no proof," Mr. Kendi sneered. But Mwamba held up the last piece of chocolate he'd managed to save. "Then test it," he said. "If you have nothing to hide, let the elders see." Reluctantly, Mr. Kendi handed over the chocolate to Ms. Keisai, who tested it in front of everyone. The elders' eyes narrowed as they watched the powder react with the herbs Ms. Keisai used to reveal its true nature. A stunned silence fell over the crowd as they realized the truth. At that moment, Mr. Kendi's charming mask crumbled, and he snarled, turning to flee. But the villagers, outraged by his deception, surrounded him, refusing to let him escape. With the truth exposed, the village elders ordered Mr. Kendi to be brought before them. Under their questioning, "Mr. Kendi, you came to us under the guise of friendship, of kindness. But your intentions were poison from the start. You have preyed upon the innocence of our children, luring them with sweets that masked something dark. This council seeks to understand why," Mr. Kendi stammered, his words faltering as he struggled to explain. "It was just business. I didn't mean any harm. I was only following orders from others." The villagers exchanged shocked glances, murmurs rising as Mr. Kendi hinted at a greater plot. Elder Mwana's expression darkened. "Following orders?" she repeated, her voice cutting through the crowd's whispers. "And who are these others who commanded you to poison our children?" But Mr. Kendi, realizing he'd already said too much, shook his head, avoiding her gaze. "It's not important," he muttered, his tone evasive. "What matters is that I can make amends." Elder Mwana's eyes flashed. "There is no amends for what you have done. Your actions broke the trust of this village, harming the most innocent among us. We must see to it that your punishment is remembered, that this lesson resonates for generations." The elders conferred quietly among themselves, finally agreeing on a course of action. Turning back to the crowd, Elder Mwana announced the punishment with a voice that left no room for doubt. "For his crimes against our children and our trust, Mr. Kendi shall spend the next year as a servant to this village, tending to every need of the families whose children he affected. He will labor from dawn until dusk, and the families he betrayed will decide his duties." But this alone is not enough. The crowd watched, rapt, as Elder Mwana continued. "To remind him and everyone else of his crime, he shall wear a mark, a sign of his deceit. painted on his hands and face every morning, so that all may see and remember his betrayal. The villagers murmured, astonished at the severity of the punishment. For a man as prideful as Mr. Kendi, the humiliation alone would be a constant, painful reminder of his misdeeds. But Elder Mwamba wasn't finished. Furthermore, she added, her gaze sharp, you shall gather here in the village square every full moon to recount the events of this day. You will remind the children and their families how you came to deceive us, how you nearly took control of their lives. And this story shall be passed down, so that no one forgets. At these words, Mr. Kendi's face drained of color. He tried to argue, but the villagers turned their backs on him, leaving him to stand alone in the square, shamed and broken. That night, as Mr. Kendi was led away to begin his year of labor, the children of the village gathered around Elder Mwamba, asking her to explain the punishment. She smiled sadly and said, "This is not only about justice, children. This is about teaching us all to be wary of those who offer easy pleasures and promise happiness with no effort. Mr. Kendi's punishment is a lesson to remind us to seek true goodness, not temporary satisfaction." And so, with Mr. Kendi's punishment a lasting part of the village's tradition, the people of Inzi never forgot the lesson he left behind. For years to come, parents and children alike recounted the story of the man who tried to deceive them, understanding the importance of vigilance, integrity, and the courage to stand against wrongdoing. With Mr. Kendi gone, the students slowly began to recover, the fog of addiction lifting as they returned to their studies and friendships. Mwamba, Mia, and Zuri became heroes in the village, their courage inspiring others to remain vigilant against those who might exploit them. Mr. Bakery commended Mwamba and his friends for their bravery, reminding them that true strength lies not only in knowledge, but in the courage to stand up for what is right. Ms. Kasai, too, praised their resilience, urging them to remember the dangers of trusting blindly in others' kindness. Though the memory of Mr. Kendi's dark influence lingered, the village of Inzi emerged stronger, united by the lessons they had learned. And Mwamba, wiser and more confident, knew he would always protect his friends and his village, no matter what dangers might come.